Welcome to the Spool podcast. Unwind with Dr. Nils Roemer, Dean of the Bass School at UT Dallas.
We're really thrilled to have you here today. Bob Pearson, a really accomplished individual. You are experienced in successful media companies, leading communication, major corporations, author of 4 books. You have run companies that are crossing advertisement and cybersecurity. You are also on the side, whenever you have extra time, teach at various universities, amongst them also UT Austin, where you teach in the School of Business.
Yes.
There's tons of things about you online that one finds, your various public accomplishments. You're obviously very connected. And as I then realized, thinking about today and looking at you, there is, however, what I encountered, a fairly carefully crafted public persona. And then what one normally runs into pictures of family, soccer, or any kind of normal things, even your faculty page.
Yeah.
Bare bones.
Yeah.
So how does it come together? On the one side, there's, you being in the business of advertising and then very public, and then at the same time.
Yeah, it's a great question, a great observation. And it's interesting because we teach executives how to build their brand.
Right.
And when you build their brand, you're talking about thought leadership and your position on issues and things like that. And I actually followed that same doctrine myself. So I think I love talking about business and new ideas and technology and innovation. But when it comes to my 2 daughters and my wife and my dog, and it's like
he has a dog. There we go. He has a dog.
Yeah.
He has never stated that anywhere else.
Never stated it anywhere.
Exactly.
I just keep that separate.
Exactly.
I just keep that separate. I figure that's not something I want to volunteer publicly.
Stay with me just for
Yeah.
a second there, because you just kind of said this in relationship to what you teach, crafting a brand and all that. But it doesn't also mean that crafting one's brand is as much a production as it's an exercise in control, so to speak, in terms of what goes out and what does not. Whereas I think we sometimes have that kind of thought, like, the more I post, the more I'm like, here I'm at the beaches,
Right,
here I'm like
exactly.
this, the more.
People confuse volume and noise.
That's what I'm trying to get at,
Yeah.
that you seem to propagate more that idea that define something clearly and craft it and put it out there, and don't dilute it with
That's exactly it.
fluffy or extra or whatever you want to call it.
So when I talk to folks who are building their own brand, I say, okay, what is your platform? And a lot of times people, I have no idea. And in my case, I thought, okay, I'm actually speaking to the C-suite. So if I put something out, if the C-suite would say this is interesting, I did my job. And so that's how I focus it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a big challenge also to us in universities. We mostly like to talk to ourselves. I mean, we're really good at it, and we always come away like feeling that we won the argument. But then we also obviously have to recognize that we have to talk to various stakeholders, and that's not always an easy exercise for us, how to translate what we do to, well, maybe not a C-suite, but to potential high schoolers or their parents or the wider community or donors. So it's a very varied kind of exercise of sorts. And
this is why I love speaking publicly too, because I think, Bindu and I talked when I was at speaking.
We have people in the audience here today. And Scott, you can also say hello in the back.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, you like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But that was for University of Texas at Austin, and we were talking about, actually it's for all the Texas schools, about higher education. So then we're talking about higher education and AI. So I come away from that learning a lot about education, not just what I was bringing to the party. Or a week and a half ago, I was in Dubai speaking at the World Government Summit. So yeah, I'm giving my ideas, but I'm then getting all these folks coming up and saying, what about this and what about this? And you learned a lot. Mm-hmm. So I find that two-way street is what makes it fun. Mm-hmm. And it often leads to the next idea.
So I mean, well, you mentioned it, so we may as well already go there. AI and the kind of idea of advertisement, communication, or education. How is AI in your mind kind of challenging that? It seems to be both the dynamic. Well, it's also the question that we're debating is, respectively, when you set out about to create a marketing campaign, then I would suspect, I'm a historian, so I really don't know what I'm talking about right now, so, but I'm trying to make it up as good as I can. Then I would imagine it's very much built around data, right? Very data-driven market analysis and all of that. And so how do you balance that kind of emphasis on evidence, so to speak, with kind of creativity on the other side? That seems to be a little bit the kind of question for me.
The way I like to say it is there's two dynamics that I spend a lot of time on, audience and agents. And so with audience, when you look at data, you can see how an audience is shaping itself. You can see which channels are actually emerging as more important. You know, take something like TikTok. When it first started, everyone...
We don't. I mean, we don't look at it. You know, we're not allowed.
Okay.
TikTok, we don't know what it is.
Can't use it.
Can it? But
it came out of nowhere, right? Because no one really thought it was taking off, and all of a sudden it was the most visited site in the world.
Right.
You know, or you look at something like a Discord, where people said, "Oh, that's just a cute little gaming platform,"
Right.
but it's actually used widely by students around the United States as a way to communicate in between classes. You know, so
or in between games as well. I mean,
between games,
they do that as well.
Exactly. But that's audience, right? So that dynamic is really interesting to look at, how people are shaping media. And then on the agent side, where you having AI go out and gather data that we could never gather before.
Right.
And then put together maybe 5 different data sets and get an insight that we couldn't get a year or 2 ago, which is kind of cool.
No, it's very cool, and we all are getting more and more into this. I mean, as a school, we're, you know, thinking about our own branding, we're thinking about our own marketing, and we're thinking about, you know, how by deploying now companies that can help us, how you can really target things now to particular age groups, to particular postal codes, to potential students that did dare to click on some history sites or art or something like that before. Or so you can really, instead of just blasting out wide volume, you can almost dial it down to the house on the corner that you're really trying to get of sorts, right?
And that has a couple of things to it. I mean, one is we do work in clinical trial recruitment. So in something like that, you have a study and you're trying to reach maybe 1,000 people to get into a trial, but you only want 25 in Dallas and you only want 25 in Houston. And so the ability to figure out exactly where those people are and then reach them and convince them to do something is key. The other thing we're seeing is the marketing funnels collapsing on us, which I think is a good thing, because we've spent so much time in the past trying to get awareness just to get people to consider something, to move and eventually buy. Now we're just going direct.
Well, but it's also, I mean, going to some of your books, I think storytelling has acquired a kind of new importance in all of that, right?
Absolutely.
So the ways by which, this has been around already for a while, that I think you start to, you see when you look at advertisement, not just simply photos of incredibly beautiful shoes, but the idea that with those shoes you can walk down, you know, that street, or there's a whole kind of story about how that person who's wearing that shoes can do this, that, or the other, right? There's a brand, and as a potential consumer, the shoes is the last thing you're thinking about. It's that whole cluster of ideas and context that come along with it, right?
You just summarized it, right? If you have a narrative that's powerful that associates with the brand, we remember it, we tell it to each other, we share it, and you have word of mouth and good things happen. But it's hard to get a narrative that actually sticks to a brand for the long term.
Well, and it's hard to get a narrative also, not just that sticks, but that really is so distinct that it sticks only to your company. And so this is the struggle that we have in universities. So we're all places of excellence. We all kind of promote curiosity and creativity and student success. But so does every other university. So what is it that we can say that is distinct about us, right?
You know, I don't know what you're thinking, but when I think of UT Dallas, I think of the origin of it, and it came out of Texas Instruments and a big research need. Right. And I've always thought of people at UT Dallas as being very smart, engineer-focused, analytics-focused. Like, there's something going on here that's unique to tech. And
obviously.
But there's like a good brand there.
No, well, there's a good brand. And we usually lean into our history exactly like you suggested. Even for the arts, we do that. We like to emphasize that we're part of the founding schools and not an afterthought, that engineers or computer science or otherwise, arts have always been seen, and the humanities have always been seen as an integral part. But that brings me also a little bit, I mean, we can jump from there straight to, what's it called, Next Solution Group. That is a group that you created and are spearheading, but which is specializing in all kinds of things. But it's advertising clients' reputation through crisis and issues management, meaning business intelligence, public affairs, advertisement, cybersecurity. In other words, it's a kind of blending of sorts of things that otherwise were in very discrete units, you know, in different parts of our economy of sorts, right?
Yeah.
But so it's a little bit like, you know, thinking about the arts and technology in one. Why do you think is there a need to bring these things together in such unique ways?
It's a good question. I mean, well, one, just to say before I get into it, is the first thing you do in starting any company is find the right CEO to run it.
That's right.
And Ray Kearns, who runs it, is a tremendous CEO, so give him the credit for Next Solutions. What's happening is we have more threats to the reputation of any organization than we've ever had. So it's easier to misinform, it's easy to disinform, it's easier to have a cyber attack. And so if you're in the C-suite, you're actually wondering, what are all the ways that our reputation can be diminished?
Heard, yeah.
And so that requires proactivity. It used to be someone was calling us, we didn't like what they were saying, we would put together a statement and we deal with it. Today it means we have to really be planning to say, who are all the people who are coming after us, what are all the risks we have for security, and put that together and say, okay, what's our plan? And so that's why you have like this more comprehensive offering that's being developed.
Really, really interesting, and probably keeps you guys busy precisely because the challenges or threats these days are anything becoming more and more. But it does also, to me, it just kind of displays a little bit the thought that the kind of knowledge that is required these days does actually draw from multiple expertises and not any longer from one domain.
Yeah, so if you're thinking of a reputational issue, you have to understand how bad actors think, and you know, or an adversary thinks. So you can't just walk into their trap in a sense. A lot of times they're trying to bait an organization to communicate. You may not want to. With cybersecurity, you don't have to be an engineer, but you do have to understand how people hack in and why, so you can see who is it, what are they doing, what's the modus operandi, and you know, our team can see that like that, and you can say, okay, they're probably from this part of the world, they're probably this type of talent, they're probably going to do this type of theft, and it's immediate because it's practice.
So if, you know, we're just trying to kind of learn here a little bit as we go. So if you're trying to set up something, you have to have a kind of compelling story and narrative. You have to kind of create a comprehensive but convincing branding. You have to then be patient and very controlled and stay with that and don't flood the market, so to speak. And at the same time, you have to be watchful, so to speak, or cautious in terms of other potential threats that you could encounter.
Yes.
I
think it's right. And the example that comes to mind as you're saying that would be like Nike. So Nike's a great example. If you go back in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were getting hit with, hey, you have sweatshops.
Right.
You have underage workers, right? And that was a big deal.
Right, it was.
And then you look at Nike over time, and then Nike all of a sudden is getting more towards social issues. They're aligning more with their audience. And that brand and social issues start to come together. That actually worked for two reasons. One, good for society, also sold a lot more stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, social responsibility became more and more important during that time. And I think there's maybe an element to that as well that, you know, also universities have to deal with in terms of how we address those kind of questions. So
universities are, as you know, a little different. In what I always say with companies is sustainability initiatives will work if you also make money doing it. Right. If you don't make money doing it, people get tired of it, they get fatigued, they go on to the next topic. And it's just the way it is.
Figuring out something that is both economically sound and sustainable, in other words.
That's right. That's right.
How about your books? So, you know, this is job number 1 or 2 or 3 will, you know, occupy you probably enough. So, but in between, you wrote at least 4 books that I came across.
5, and I'm working on the 6th.
So what is this number 6?
The 6th will be called The Compass.
Okay.
And it's going to be how to navigate AI. And so it's not going to be teaching you what
so
AI is.
do you write a new book version of that every other week, or how does that work?
Yeah,
because it's
usually on the
changing
weekends.
no, but because it's just changing so quickly?
No, it's a great, what I'm trying to do is think through how do you think about AI? So in other words, so for the person who's not a technologist, how do you understand machine learning? How do you understand software? How do you understand agents? What does agentic architecture mean? There's all these things being thrown out, and I think most people are like, I don't really know what people are saying. So I want to help people say, how do you actually think that through? And then the other part is, how do you innovate? So one of the things is, if someone knows nothing about AI, that's okay, because you really want to think through what's the problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
And if you're thinking about the problem to try to solve, and you have the right people around you, you can come to better solutions a lot quicker. So we need people just being creative and good thinkers, and they don't have to all know AI.
What do you mean by not knowing AI? They don't have to use it, or they don't have to know how it works?
Well, let's say like you're trying to improve the treatment of people with cancer.
Right.
Right. So someone may say, well, if I could only have genetic scans and electronic health records, and if I could only do all that, I could get a better point of care solution. An AI expert is going to go, well, gosh, we'll just create agents and we'll be pulling from all these databases. We'll bring that into a solution and we'll give it to you.
But I was just at a board meeting, and so one of the things that came up was that they, over the next couple of years, want to revisit their strategic plan.
Yeah.
And so the first thought that crossed my mind, get the first version out with AI, and then make sure that your strategic plan will never look like this one, because otherwise, you're just going to reproduce what virtually everyone else is saying. So, but AI is good sometimes, maybe in that respect, more as a kind of getting the first dirty draft out, and then, hopefully do other things there. I mean, in this domain, strategic plans. I mean, they all sound a little bit the same.
I think the thing is, Nils, what you're getting at is like, so if we think of like the human genome, was mapped in the early 90s. Right. And it's 2025, and we're really getting now gene therapies that are meaningful.
That's right.
It took a long time, right? The web, 1989, Tim Berners-Lee. Took a long time into the 2000s till we really started to see Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. So AI to me is similar. Like, we have this mentality when things are new that everything's changing immediately. And I actually think the changes in AI will occur over the next 10 to 20 years. So we're going to we just have to kind of be riding this as we go and get there.
So you think this is, the kind of question, where are we in the curve? We're
in the beginning.
We're at the beginning, that would be, that's interesting.
But we always make the same, as humans, we always make the same mistake, because we go, oh my goodness, everything's changing immediately. We have to do this. Let's go right now. I'm not up to speed. And it's like, everyone just calm down and just learn about it, and you're going to learn how to ride that wave. So a good strategic plan, I think, is going to be more fungible. Right. So we can juke with AI.
But it's interesting. I mean, the mapping of our DNA. I mean, that not only took a long time, but it was an international effort, right?
Yes.
It was a large-scale collaborative effort to get there.
Yes.
Extending that question out to.
I hope that happens in AI.
Do you see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely.
So the question is, how much is maybe just to spell it out a little bit, is the development? I mean, with DeepSeek. Is now the question, how many participants and how many competitors in the kind of crafting of AI are we going to have, or how much is it going to, in the end, come down? I mean, investors last year thought that this was going to be a game that is essentially around, a handful of big companies, right?
Yeah, just a couple, right. But that's how people think in real time. The democratization of innovation is always a good thing.
This is, you think, always. Are we just kind of edging into that because it just becomes now more plausible actually to create something without gigantic resources and the best of tech? Is that the example?
I do think so, because right now we're obsessed with OpenAI, and Grok 3 just came out, and that's DeepSeek, and we just think of those things. What we're not thinking through is that whole generation of how agents will actually transform how we get data, or how will we absorb content differently. That's something that people don't even think about. But if I can get information in any language in the form I want, like that, what that does is it's two-way innovation. So let's say I'm in Vietnam and I have an idea, if I write it in Vietnamese, is it going to get to the headquarters? If it's in Chicago, maybe not. But if I can translate it, put it into an audio format and send it, I have a better chance my idea may get looked at. So there's this whole wave of things that are going to keep changing.
I mean, some of the, I mean, one of those that we've just discovered lately and have a lot of fun with is a Google Notebook. And then the ability that it creates almost instantaneously a podcast like this one, where you just think, how is that possible?
It is pretty good.
It is really good. I mean, you can almost listen to them afterwards and think, wow, this is actually quite, I mean, depending on what you're feeding it, but not, don't quote me on this one, but instead of reading everything, you just feed it there and then it kind of regurgitates it in a kind of interesting conversation of sorts. What are the,
I think that's awesome.
I'm still mesmerized by this, and so I haven't quite come yet around to, being as critical-minded about its limitation. It does seem to take the edges off, so I get very agitated in these conversations. I get excited, and my voice goes probably up and down, whereas they stay...
Oh, it's almost
monotone. They stay calm and collected throughout, no matter what they're discussing, right?
Exactly.
Our AI bots there. But nonetheless, it's incredible.
There's the National University in Australia is doing a lot of work with what they call the dragonfly effect. Because the dragonfly can see 360 and all that, right? And what it's really getting at is that we're getting insights and information from many different directions. And as a result of that, the way we think and our ideas will change as well. So to me, if the basics of, hey, I got a slide, I can turn it into a 3-minute audio, awesome, right? Put it up in the cloud, let it bounce around with other stuff. Because what humans are going to do is they're going to be getting new ways to look at things, better insights, which could that advance science, could it advance research? That's what's exciting.
But we got into this on this podcast like a while ago already with some guests, because it does pose certain questions for higher education, or for education more generally speaking, that I think, I think you can, with a certain justification, say that, when kids go through school, that a lot of it is about the acquisition of knowledge, right? And being tested, to see their ability of whether they memorized it or not. But if information is so readily available as it is now, and has, even more becomes so readily available, then you do wonder whether education can still be just about information, or it does not increasingly really have to turn on what to do with this stuff, rather, which is an altogether different, it's kind of more the problem-solving, collaborative working. It's a different educational goal altogether, it would strike me.
I think we're going to have a different challenge. Teaching is still going to be valuable no matter what, right?
No, we're the best. I mean, we're like university.
We're good.
Yeah, we're good. So nobody's going to change that, absolutely.
But we are looking at things like absorption right now. And so if there's a ton of information coming at us, that doesn't mean we're learning anything. The question is, what are we actually absorbing? How do we know that comprehension is taking hold? And I think that we're going to be held a little more accountable to say, are people really learning what they can? And we can actually prove it.
Right.
As a teacher, that would be great, because you always want to know if your student is really progressing or not. And then the other thing too is, I think we need to be integrating these techniques and tools into the classroom as fast as we can.
That's, the kind of challenge right now, how quickly are not our universities jumping on this?
Yes.
And, the challenges are, numerous: financial, knowledge, fear, uncertainty. And so, this is like something that we really have to wrap our minds around, how we're going to get there. But it's, even when it comes to research, we are partly already there. We have these gigantic databases where all the refined research is. But when you open up some of them these days, and where you used to see the article, you already see the summary right next to it, and considering the sheer volume of things
so you're getting at something I think is this big advantage for universities that they haven't tapped into. So Larry Ellison, CEO of Oracle, was just talking recently about databases and how they're so disparate, right? And he said, what we're doing is we're really building digital pipes.
Right.
And if we build digital pipes, we can have new data lakes. And so if you think of a data lake for UT Dallas, you're pulling in all the information you have here, but then you want to put it into a pond that's just for marketing, or a puddle that's just for the sales section of marketing. And we'll be able to do that through digital pipes. And that will open up a lot more information for all of us.
No, that's true. I mean, in that respect, if we're meeting here in our art gallery today.
Right.
If we would have met in our library, I mean, we still have some books on the shelves, but it's probably fair to say that there's far more volume these days that come through these various databases.
Yeah.
That are also quite costly. So there's this real assets that universities hold, that they have these kind of tools now at my disposal, at staff's disposal, at any student who can access this, so they can harness that for whatever purpose. Let's talk about purpose. I mean, right now we talk more generally about innovation, curiosity, knowledge. You wrote a book on hate.
Yeah.
So, in other words, what we're trying to teach or not teach is not just skills or knowledge, but it has really meaning for the very fabric of our societies.
Yes.
Do you mind?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
like, it kind of jumps out in your lines of things.
It's very
that you've
different
done.
than what I normally talk about.
Exactly. Do you mind telling us a little bit more
I do
about
teach about how to counter mis and disinformation. And so in doing that, it really got me to thinking about there's a continuum of bias that can lead to hate, that can lead to violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that continuum look like, and where can we intervene successfully to slow it down or to actually stop it? And
so walk us through this a little bit. I mean, this is, I think, a timely one right now. So how do we detect it, first of all?
Yeah, so it's detecting it could be who people are following.
Okay.
So a lot of times if someone is going to get confirmation bias, they're going to fall for rumors, hoaxes, things like that. They're actually doing something as innocent as just following the wrong person. Right? So if we actually know who those folks are, we can actually say, okay, how do we actually impact what's happening here? This happens, for example, we've looked at say white supremacists and how they try to convert military veterans. And so well, you can see where they're going. And then you say, okay, what do you do about that? That's one aspect of it. A bigger thing worldwide is there's a lot of very young people in the world, and between birth and age 25, that's when a lot of our brain capacity is forming, related to habits and memories. So most of our time is spent in front of this phone telling us everything.
Right.
So the question is, what are people reading? And this is why with the journalistic model, I think, how do we actually get journalists to get more into social media to reach people in the phones that we know they're already consuming, so we have a chance to actually impact them, rather than count on Facebook or Twitter to update them on the news of the day.
So how do we get the journalists into that? Maybe if we can just stick it out with that for a moment. Do you mind?
Well, I just spoke about this recently, and what I said was the model we have today will fail. It's already
the traditional
failing.
Model of journalism.
Subscriptions are going down, revenue's going down, everyone knows it's been happening for years. So what we have to do is say, hey, journalists are really important. If you're writing for the Washington Post or New York Times, and you can get your voice into Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or somewhere else, and you can build that audience and continue, keep half the revenue. Let the New York Times or the Washington Post have the other half. And we have a generation of billionaires running companies. So we have Jeff Bezos, we have Mark Benioff, we have Patrick Soon. We should be asking them to say, use your acumen to reinvent the business model so journalists can actually have a bigger voice. And when I say journalists, I always differentiate between journalists and those with opinions, right? And I think opinion-oriented people, you're 50-50. But journalists telling the truth, we need more of that out there, whether we like the truth or not.
And that it comes to us in all kinds of forms. So that's why platforms like Medium or things like that, where people just self-author, become more and more popular in your mind?
Could be, it could be. And you'd like to think that journalists getting into more social platforms would inspire people to kind of copy what they're doing in a sense.
Well, I think on some level this equally applies to us, that any university has an incredible amount of exceptionally smart and educated people around.
Yes.
I mean, that's right?
Absolutely.
And they tell you, right? And so the professors usually don't hold back letting you know. But the way by which we do what we do is not so readily accessible to everyone else, right? I mean, if we publish things in these big books or in these long articles that get published in peer-reviewed journals that are subscription-based, that only universities can afford, then in lots of ways we're making it really difficult for ourselves to be like heard outside of that. And so maybe not just for journalists, but also for academics.
Agree.
This could be a good model forward.
So this is exactly, you're raising I think, a perfect example of why universities need to embrace AI quicker. Because if let's say you did a publication that came out today, and it's 30 pages long, and it's great, but it's very dense. With AI,
not that we ever write dense books, but but let's assume just for a moment, right?
Yeah. But with AI, we can query that and see the 2 or 3 points that we want. We can translate it into a different language. We can turn it into a 90-second audio summary. All of a sudden now, we're unlocking the knowledge in that paper, right? And so I think universities should be embracing that across the board. All of the research that's being done comes to life. But to think that people are going to like spend the time to go through all these studies and listen to them and learn them, they're not going to do it. Most people just ignore it.
No, I think that's, again, also a question in terms of what do we teach actually. And so in our school right now, we have, I think, anywhere of upward of 40 different podcasts, some small, some short lasting, some long lasting. But that's, for example, one of these new technologies that students and faculty have readily embraced as another way of, talking about the things that matter to us. We're doing it right now. Some of them on these other platforms I mentioned already, Medium, to get things out there. But that's, I think a big challenge for us, that we as academics have to find a way by which we make what we do more accessible, because otherwise, it's hard for us to sit on the other side and say nobody reads my books.
Right.
Academic book publishing has become very fragile market of sorts, right? This is not particularly sustainable, and we have all kinds of other things attached to it. The degree to which faculty publishes makes their tenure and their promotion cases, but they are kind of tied to a market model that is probably also not sustainable any longer.
So let's take the example of, let's say we want more knowledge of what we have at the university to reach students, alumni, and everyone else that we care about. If we look out 1 to 2 years from now, about half of all search that occurs in the world will be through agents. It won't be through Google, won't be through Baidu, won't be through Bing. It's going to be through agents going around the globe, scraping whatever they can to bring it back to whatever app they're working with. And so we need to say, okay, all the information we have, can we break it into bits? Can we build bigger websites? Can we build tabs on those websites? How do we expose everything we have so it can get picked up, so it shows up when someone queries?
And that's,
that's
in lots of ways a kind of utopian or dystopian kind of sense of things. I've just recently heard someone who said, well, the good old Google searches were cumbersome, but they produce always an endless amount of alternative answers to the one question, right? So instead of being confronted with one, they gave me like the endless list that I had to scroll through. AI gives me one, which makes the whole thing far more convenient and faster, but is it also, I've been playing with AI, the extent to which you can prompt AI into giving you an answer and contradicting itself and then reconciling it.
Right.
It doesn't like it so much, does it?
No, I look into Inflection AI, and one of my favorite apps is Pi. And the reason why is because Inflection AI has memory, search, and conversation. So it's speaking to you conversationally, it's remembering who you are, and in the future it will just completely change how we interact, because it's going to say, Nils, you like certain topics, and when you come back here, would you like us to prepare that for you? Or it may just do it for you anyway. Right? But it also could be how you book an airline, and it just knows who you are.
That you always like the aisle seat and that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
So Inflection AI is going to change how we think of search and how we interact with data.
So you talked a lot about what AI is, what advertisement is, how we may want to confront hate and so on.
Yeah.
But that's more from the perspective of, let's say, the makers, the creators of campaigns, or the authors and so on and so forth. How about on the other end, the kind of quote unquote consumer of all of this information that comes, unfortunately without warning, straight into your social media feed? How, if at all, what are you supposed to do on that end if you you follow one of these rabbit holes on social media, and all of a sudden go from this to conspiracy theory to this. How do you revert this again, or what are you supposed to do?
Yes.
If you're like saying, I just don't want to deal with this any longer. We don't want people to turn off information, but how do they control, so to speak, a little bit better maybe what comes in?
I believe that if we're really going to go after mis and disinformation at scale, we have to. I'm not a big believer in regulation, just to have it, but this is one where regulation is needed. And so we are going to have to look at social channels. What happens is we chase people off Facebook and Twitter in the big channels, and we think, oh, good, there's less hate on those channels. But actually, there's not less hate. It just moves to other channels.
Somewhere else. Right.
And they go to alternative applications. They go to the dark web. They create forums that many of us haven't heard of. And it continues unabated because we're not looking there. So we need to be more comprehensive and say, where are people having these conversations, and make sure they follow the same rules that we expect Facebook to follow or any other media property. So that's one. The second is that people see it and they don't know what to do about it. This is where you tell someone that you know. It could be even writing to your congressperson and saying, hey, I'm seeing this happening. This is not appropriate. What are you going to do about it? And we need to be thinking grassroots up to support this. Because what bad actors do is they figure out where we're not comfortable, and that's where they go. So if you look at the dark web or alternative apps, they're there all the time. So we have to, it's kind of like we all have to be in it together.
So we have to advocate for ourselves, in other words, and not just simply say, oh no, we kind of have to.
We all play a role in security if we look at it that way.
And that's a good way to think about that. We are not just simply the passive victims of all the stuff that comes our way. But a lot of what comes our way is not just that. The other part is advertisement, and advertisement has changed over the years in so many ways. Sometimes, I find it intriguing to see how older technology kind of gets revived or reinvents itself. You just came to Dallas to visit us.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've passed by any number of billboards about UT Dallas. We're all over the town, which are fantastic in lots of ways, but very old technology of sorts. Billboards have been around for as long as there have been cars. But where's advertising going, from here on forward?
It's going to evolve, but I think what's consistent is telling a great story. So since the beginning of time, if you can build a powerful narrative, you're going to do fine. I think the mistake we make over the last, say, 20 years is we say, oh, everything's moving to low attention span, short form. So then we all go to short form. And then the next thing we know, wait a second, 3-hour podcasts are actually in vogue. So we actually are okay with long form. What it really comes down to is if we feel informed and entertained, we're good. A great way to look at this is, where do people spend the most time in media today? It's actually in gaming. So a gamer is spending 5-6 hours a day.
That's right.
It's arguably the #1 media platform on earth. So how do we become relevant there? So what advertisers have to do is just say, where is my audience going? How are they consuming? And how do I realign my media models?
And how do I get there? And I guess educators have to say the same thing.
Exactly.
If the students spend quite a bit of time on this or that or the other platform, or indeed in metaverse or things like that, there's opportunity also to put content into those realms as well.
Exactly. That's why I've always looked at Discord, because Discord is actually quite good for, let's say there's a group of 10 students and they want to talk to each other during the day. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't the university come out with its own version of Discord and actually make it available for all of their students to have private conversations? And it's more secure, and you still can do the same thing. So I think there's ways that we can really embrace some of these new technologies.
So our time, unfortunately, is slowly coming to an end. But on and off, you already indicated that you think we're just really at the edge of all of this.
Beginning.
So just give us a little bit of a sense from your perspective of, what you can see what's going to happen in your mind.
Yeah.
I don't know how far you can see, but let's try it out.
Yeah. To me, one of the most exciting things going on is the move towards agentic architecture. And think of it as, if you have one agent going in and looking at all the clinical trials that are occurring in the world, what if you had 10 other agents that were looking at other things, and they could all talk to each other?
Instead of just being
just
isolated.
not
right?
11
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
things,
right.
but 11 things that are talking to each other and self-learning. So they start to realize like, ooh, this is actually works. We'll do better at this. So it's almost like a low-level organism. You know, they actually can get better. That's extremely exciting, and that's going to be
That's going to
game-changing.
happen now.
That affects everything from healthcare to energy to, you know, pick the topic. And then Inflection AI is the other one that I think is going to sneak up on us, where we're going to say, you know, I'm actually not just getting what I want through ChatGPT or Grok 3, but I'm actually having a relationship. Because the future of that is going from I can give you information to I can actually do tasks for you, to I can actually have now an avatar-like person that looks like me or you, that is the same person each time, that actually knows how to interact with us. And all of a sudden it's like, this is kind of my friend. You know, and that's hard to believe today, but that's not that far off in the distance.
So all in all, I mean, instead of the kind of big worrisome headlines that we're hearing, what do you see coming our way, at least from for the foreseeable future, is actually lots of exciting innovations in your mind, right?
We do have to. I heard Elon Musk had a great quote recently. He said, AI is like a super genius kid, and you still have to teach it values and culture.
Yes,
and I think that's probably the biggest obligation we have in society, is we have to figure out how do we influence software programmers with values and the culture, so we're not dealing with things at the end, but we're influencing people at the beginning of the process.
But that, you know, in a certain way, one could argue, brings us also back again to what we do on campuses, right? Right now we're teaching more in our kind of disciplines in our schools, so the let's not, you know, go just after the computer science kids, but everyone learns, you know, removed from the others, so to speak. And what we may have to strive more toward too is a greater integration, so that, you know, for example, these ethical considerations are not just critical when you study medicine, but also important if you study business or if you engineering and so on and so forth.
It's another form of sustainability, and one of the things I've been talking about recently is data pollution. That's the other thing we have to deal with. Is if we think of mis and disinformation like we do, you know, water, air, land pollution, we don't like that. But if something's impacting our neurons, we're like, oh, I guess it's okay. It's not okay. It's no different than polluting a river. We're just polluting our brain. So I think we need to be thinking of how do we fight data pollution together? You know, it doesn't matter what organization it is.
Thank you so much, Bob. You know, we learned a little bit more about the future, which is always a good one.
Yes.
And I think we're, you know, in our school all along have been always big advocates of storytelling, and I think that's also what you seem to be suggesting, that ultimately is at the core of anything that we need to do. Tell a good story if you want to engage anyone, if you want to educate anyone, and in particular if you want them to do anything, right?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.